Good morning, everyone. My name is Nevaeh Vasquez, and today I'm going to be reading to you from the book of Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Thank you, Nevaeh. So we began the new year with a quiz. You ready for a quiz? Two-question quiz. 2 questions. If you get one, you failed. No, I'm just kidding. What if you knew that you already had an A before we ever started the quiz? Would that free you up and cause you not to sweat just as a little bit? All right, so it's really pretty easy. The first question's very simple. The second question a little bit more complicated, but I need you to interact with me so that I know that you're awake, okay? So, question number 1, what is your favorite book in the Bible? What is your favorite book in the Bible? If you have one. If you have a couple, say that again. 1 Corinthians. Okay. James. Philippians. Genesis. Proverbs. That was my dad's favorite. Carol. Isaiah. Anybody else? Luke. Mine too. Gospel of Luke. All right, so I want you to be thinking about it. You might not have ever framed it in that way, like I like this one the best, and maybe there isn't a best, but there's one that you maybe find yourself drawn to more often than others. I certainly do with the Gospels. I find myself always drawn back there. Whenever I feel like maybe my reading is stale or I'm just not connecting with the Word of God, and mostly it's because of me, I always go back to the Gospels, and probably more often than not the Gospel of Luke. It provides for me just the truest sense with the most detail about who Jesus is and why it is that I want to be a follower of His. What it is that draws me in the first place to have the life that I have and the faith that I have. Luke always draws me back to the person of Jesus. It's my favorite. Luke and Acts, written by the same person. So those two together. So that's mine and some of yours. Now the second question is a little bit more difficult. Why is it your favorite? Why is it your favorite? If I asked you the question about, why do you like something better than another? Why is chocolate ice cream your favorite? And you'd say, because it just tastes better, right? But so you can't really give that answer when you're talking about the Bible or books of the Bible, but, why do you like what you like? What is it about that book that you answered the way you did? What do you think? Got any responses? Yeah, Susan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. My dad was very similar. He liked that. He just thought that there was enough nuggets there that on a daily basis, if you went, you could connect with something that would maybe be very practical in how you lived your life and dealt with others. There's a great deal of wisdom that came mostly from Solomon. There are other writers of the Proverbs, but anyway, it was about getting better. It was about understanding things and making practical. So I think there's something there with that. Anybody else? Yeah, Janae. Yeah. For those on our live stream and even those in the back who maybe couldn't hear Janae, Acts is her favorite, and it's her favorite because it helped her to have some sense of what the early first century church was like, maybe before things went wrong. I always talk about how Acts is sort of the birth of the church, and in the earliest days it gives us some idea of what life together could be before it all goes so desperately wrong, which is why all the epistles come thereafter trying to correct and instruct and direct them back to maybe where they started. So, yeah, Linda. Yeah. Yeah. Psalms is what Linda said because it really speaks to her heart. That's how I was surprised when I didn't hear that earlier, that someone didn't say Psalms, because that is the place to go when you are feeling a variety of different emotions and feelings. You can go there and connect in a very real way with people who felt it's kind of like Psalms gives you permission to feel any sort of way. And not just that it allows it, but that it honors it and it blesses it and it tells us that it's good. And so I think Psalms is good in that way. Anybody else? Why your book is your favorite? Lydia?
I was at a Bible-based mission, and I would have to refresh my memory on why James was so important to me, but I think it was teaching about a new way to put Christ into action in your life
Mm-hmm.
in a practical way on a daily basis. It made it easy to understand
Yeah.
the Proverbs,
Mm-hmm.
because there's one for every day of the month.
Yeah.
And I like to go on the first and read the first one, second read the second one.
Yeah. That's what Susan was saying. Yeah.
Magically it applies to that day.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, that's what Susan was saying about the Proverbs, is there's one for each day of the month if they're 31. And so, yeah, we can use it in that way. James almost wasn't included in the canon, if you can believe it. They debated back and forth as to its place there. But James is very, very practical. It gives like real practical advice about how to live your faith out. I'm so glad it was included. Anybody else?
So for me, 1 Corinthians, because it's the one that when everything felt dark, kind of brought light back into my life.
Hmm.
And because I always lived, as many of you probably know, by 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the one where I'm constantly reminded about God's love for us.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kristen. Just 1 Corinthians being a place that brings you back to the centrality of love in our faith and reminds you about how God feels about us and how we are to be with each other. I've never had anybody over the years tell me that 1 Corinthians was their favorite, so that's very interesting. Thank you for that. You know, in all of the surveying that I've ever done, most of what I have gotten as far as feedback is pretty similar to what I heard today. There were a few surprises for me. But you know, in all of the time, and I've done this over the years, mostly more informal and just sort of one-on-one when I ask people what their favorite book of the Bible is, I've gotten similar responses. But what I've never gotten is no one has ever told me the Minor Prophets. Like, not ever, you know. I mean, Carol in the back said Isaiah, who it was a prophet. He was more of a major prophet, huge book in the center of the Bible. But nobody has ever told me that they were just enthralled with Habakkuk. Nobody said, you are, Joy? Yeah. That one wouldn't surprise me. Nobody ever said, you know that Amos, I'm just addicted to Amos. Now, maybe if you were talking about famous Amos and his chocolate chip cookies, well, maybe you might get that. But as you look at the book of the 12, as they would call it in the Hebrew Bible, the 12 minor prophets, I've never had anybody tell me that their favorite book is one of those 12. But I decided, as we are jumping out of the chute to the new year, that I would introduce you to at least 4, the Fab 4, of the great 12 minor prophets, because Well, I think they have something to say to us. I think when we open up those pages of the Bible, we will not have a lot of notes in them. We will probably not be familiar with history and what's going on. Their message at times might seem harsh. There are a lot of things that are going on with these minor prophets, but I think their message is very timely. Now, the four minor prophets that I'm choosing, all come from the 8th century BC. The 8th century BC. The minor prophets, if you follow all 12 of them, will take you from the 8th century down to what is the intertestamental period, which is that period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's about 400 years between the time which the Old Testament with Malachi finishes and the New Testament with the Gospel of Matthew begins. That period, there's absolute quiet. There is no voice of God. There are no prophets. There is nothing going on. The heavens are shut up. So from the 8th century down to the 5th century, then a period of quiet, then the New Testament. So I'm going to introduce you to the four. Now, I would love it if we could together maybe figure out who those four are. Does anybody have any idea who were the prophets that spoke to what was at the time a divided nation? If you look back at the history of Israel in the 10th century BC, after the reign of Solomon when he died and his sons took over, the nation was divided in two. And from that point on, you're dealing with, in the northern kingdom, Israel, and in the southern kingdom, Judah. The 8th century BC prophets prophesied to both nations. Does anybody have any idea, just show of hands, we'll piece it together, who those four prophets are that we're going to speak to and deal with and learn from as we move through this series that I'm calling Hello, My Name Is, because I'm introducing to some of you for the very first time some of these people that you just don't know, but that maybe on the other side you will be glad that you do. So, who are they? Anybody have at least one? Can you give me one? Kristen? Amos, yes, Amos is one. Joel is a question mark. I'm not going to include Joel, but it's not a bad guess. There's debate about Joel. No. Micah. Amos, Micah. Zach? No. Hosea. Amos, Micah, Hosea, and the most famous of the four, Fab Four, Jonah. They all prophesied during a period in which who was largely at play, wreaking havoc on all of the nations that they would just trample one after another. Assyria. Assyria was on the scene. Assyria, which would today be sort of most of modern-day Iraq, parts of Kuwait, parts of Iran, parts of Turkey. It was a huge empire at the time, and they were absolutely vicious. They were brutal. They were like the worst of the worst. Even if you go back and you look at sort of the Egyptians, these are the nations that the Israelites had to deal with at one point in time or another. The Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Romans. If you were to look at all of those empires, there would be a good argument that the Assyrians were the worst of the worst. They were just vicious and brutal and unrelenting. Now, before I lay any more history on you, and I won't do too much today, but I do think it's important to have sort of a backdrop, because unless you understand what's going on at the time, it's very difficult to appreciate. It's like, that's why I think sometimes it's hard to read the prophets, because you don't fully understand, if you don't know history, what is going on in their world at the time. So to understand that is to appreciate what they are doing and what they are saying. And I think the reason that most of us don't really like to read the prophets very much, Well, I don't know. You tell me. I'll give you what I think is true. But like, if show of hands, if I were to ask you, being honest with me, like, how many of you find yourself drawn to or having read those 4 minor prophets that I just introduced to you? Amos, Micah, Hosea, and Jonah. Let's take Jonah out. Okay? But those other 3, show of hands, how many of you find yourself just being drawn to those 3 and reading their materials and learning from them on a regular basis? No. So, that being the case, and there's no shame in that, I don't find myself being drawn there often, but I'm introducing them to you for a reason. That's going to be important as hopefully it's going to be realized as the weeks bear on. But if I were to say to you, why is it that you aren't drawn there? Why don't you read those books? Why are they not as important to you as the Psalms and the Proverbs and the Gospels and Acts and some of the epistles? What would you say to me? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear it. Why aren't you drawn there? Janae. So sometimes the prophets seem angry. I think that's true. I think sometimes the prophets seem off the chain. They are so angry, the message that they have, that like, I don't know. I want to feel better, not worse when I'm reading something. Natasha.
So I was going to change my favorite to Esther, and a few obvious reasons, but the biggest one is that it just reads as a narrative, as a nice story, as there's conflict and there's the intro, and I feel like the minor prophets just don't. There's not the narrative
Okay.
readability.
Yeah.
Like Esther, or even Jonah.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, like when you're reading the Bible, I like a good story. So if there's a narrative there that I can follow and the characters are developed, that is more interesting to me. The prophets don't always have that. That's good. Anybody else? Paul?
Doom and gloom.
Doom and gloom. There does seem to be some of that, doesn't there?
All 12.
There is doom and gloom, but in every single one, there's always a thread of hope. Sometimes you get about 90% doom and gloom and like 10% hope, so it's a little hard to sort of balance the two. Yeah, I think the prophets are also just weird. They're not just angry, they're like really, really strange people. Like so, Isaiah, for example, he walked around for 3 years naked. I mean, what's up with that? I mean, you're reading this and you're like, come again? Jeremiah, he took and wore an oxen's yoke on his neck and walked around with it. I mean, that's just strange behavior. You got Hosea, who marries a prostitute and then names his children No Mercy and Not My People. I mean, how would you like that for a name? No mercy or not my, just be thankful for the name that you have. Ezekiel lay on his left side for 390 days while cooking his food over, anybody have any ideas what he cooked his food over? Cow manure. That's a little ambiance for you, right? Can you imagine? I mean, they're just weird. They're just weird. They're strange. Now, each of those things they were doing, if you learned their story, they were doing them for a reason. It was an extreme application of what they were trying to share with the nations that they were hoping would repent and return back to their God. So they did extreme things. I oftentimes, when I'm reading and then when I'm sharing prophetic things with you, I oftentimes wonder to myself, if they had presented the message in a different way, would the people who were listening have received it sooner or have missed it totally? Like, did they have to be weird and strange and angry in order for the people to hear their message? Were they that far gone? I don't know. There's no real answer to that. But I oftentimes think, sometimes when I speak about issues that are important, that sometimes upset people, I try and, as best I can, package it in a way that you can hear it and understand it. You may or may not like it, but at least you can hear it and then go from there. Now, when we're talking about these prophets, which we will unpack next week, we're going to meet Amos, and we're going to learn a little bit more about who he was and what his message was. But I want you to know that between the prophets, so there are 4 minor prophets in the 8th century BC. If you include Isaiah, who was a major prophet, he is also prophesied in the 8th century BC. So Amos, Hosea, and Jonah, their primary audience was the northern kingdom of Israel. Micah and Isaiah, their primary reference point and people that they were speaking to was the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, while they each had a different message that was specific to the people they were speaking to, all of them had these 4 things in common. They were all prophesying and speaking to issues both in the northern and southern kingdom that dealt with religious hypocrisy and rampant idolatry. They were telling the people, you go through the motions and you do the right things, but your heart is far from God. And when you leave this place where you're offering your sacrifices, you go and live as if you don't even know who God is and what place He has in your world, and you don't care about your neighbors. You don't treat them well. So religious hypocrisy, rampant idolatry, gross immorality. They were worshiping money, sex, and violence. Also, they were speaking to the injustice and oppression of the poor and the vulnerable, and the mistreatment of immigrants and refugees. Does it have any ring for you when you hear of what's going on in the northern and southern kingdom? Does it resonate with you at all? Any themes that we might be experiencing today in our world? I would say so, which is why I'm doing the series in the first place, because even though the 8th century BC is a long time ago, they're dealing with issues that are pertinent to you and to me. So each of them, as they address those issues, they were railing, and Paul, you said this, doom and gloom, they were railing at what was, but with every single one of the issues that they were dealing with, there was always and also an underlying message of hope. In other words, if you listen to what it is that I'm trying to share with you, and you honor what is being said, then as you repent and turn from your wickedness, then there's hope for you on the horizon and for your future. There's hope for better days. The Assyrian army is sort of crouched at the door and ready to come in and take you over and to destroy you. But if you will turn from this direction that you're headed in, it doesn't have to work that way. Now, does anybody know whether the Assyrian army came in and destroyed or whether or not the people relented, repented, and changed? The Assyrians came in and destroyed them. Obliterated the northern kingdom, didn't even exist on the face of the earth anymore, got rid of them entirely. Left the southern kingdom of Judah. And so when we look at and listen to these messages, I think it's important because when prophets speak truth to power, more often than not, their voices get silenced. And so I want to amplify their voices because I don't know where this whole thing's going with us, this human experiment, where it's all going to end up. But I want to sow a hopeful message such that if we learn from those who've come before us, we won't be doomed to repeat the past. Because I think that's where history comes in and speaks to me in some very real way. Like, if you learn from history, you can really alter the course of the future, not only for yourself, but for others. But if you keep walking into the same wall, you keep knocking your head against the same things, it should be no surprise that you're going to get similar results. And so I think, like Israel and Judah, there are things that most of the people didn't listen to because it was too hard for them to hear. They weren't willing, they weren't ready to be honest with themselves, and once they're honest with themselves, to amend or change their behavior. So, I don't know how this series is going to go, how it's going to settle with you, but my hope is that as we walk through these places that the minor prophets traveled, and we listen to their ancient message, that there's something that we can learn about how to live with one another and to do so better than we did for those who came before us. So, shifting from history to present, I think there are many issues that we are confronted with on a daily basis that cause me to see that our nation is as deeply divided as it has ever been in my own lifetime that I can remember, and certainly before that. We are divided on issues of race, religion, nationalism, sexual orientation, gender, immigration, and there's a whole host of other issues that I could add to that. The problem is, with all of those deep divides that we are experiencing, they've all resulted in grave injustices to large groups of people who don't deserve it. And oftentimes we think, well, we turn these social issues into political issues, and we blame one another, whatever side you stand on, whether you're on the left or you're right, but we don't look at our own selves in the mirror and learn what stake or what part we have in it. There's no humility. There's no willingness to recognize that maybe if I do my part, if I clean up my side of the street, if I amend my behaviors, maybe that might be impactful to, I don't know, my husband, my wife, my children, my friends, and then that ripple effect can occur so that if I'm doing right by God in my relationship with God and with others, that vertical, horizontal component, maybe I don't need to blame other people for all that's wrong in the world. Our job as Christ followers is not to curse the darkness and blame others for why it exists. We are to illuminate the darkness by our very lives, by the things we say, by the things we do, by how we act with one another. I think a lot of us know better, we just don't always do better. And I think that was what was going on with the 8th century nations of Israel and Judah. I think it wasn't that they were ignorant. It wasn't that they didn't know better. It's just that they didn't do better. And because they weren't willing to look at themselves in the mirror, although they probably didn't have mirrors, but they weren't willing to look at themselves, they couldn't see the change that was necessary. They heard the message of the prophet, but they thought, the Assyrians are far worse than we are. God would never use somebody who's far worse than I am to teach me a lesson that they need to learn before I do. And so we find ourselves at this place where, as we're moving into a new year, where I'm wanting for us to stop thinking about all the ways in which our world is such a bad place to be, and because it's so-and-so's fault, this group or that group, I would love it in a very hopeful way if you and I could begin to look at ourselves first and see whatever we need to see, so that as we come to truth with what's going on in our own lives, we can amend our behavior in such a way that it would be impactful to others around us. I just believe that, like, if we illuminate the darkness, it's just a better option than cursing it. I really do. And listen, not all of us are in need of the messages that we will hear, but most of us are. You know, when Nevaeh read earlier that passage from Micah chapter 6, which says, "The Lord has told us what is good, what He requires of us, which is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with Him." Those are three things that we're going to be building on over the next several weeks. And by the time we get to the Super Bowl, we're going to elevate those things, and I'm going to actually give you practical opportunities to do just that, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. These aren't just going to be general things that we appreciate from what the 8th century prophet gives us. We're going to look at how we put these into practice. We're going to look at, in doing so, what a difference that might make to the people around us and certainly to our own lives. I think for us not to do so would be to miss the significance of what the prophets have to teach us. The stakes are really high. I don't know if you feel that. I feel it every day. I feel like the stakes are very high. And we are in a place where we can either look at and blame other people for what's wrong, or we can do something about it ourselves. So I'm going to keep encouraging you in a hopeful way to illumine darkness, not curse it. I'm going to keep encouraging you to engage those places that need grace, that need mercy, that need hope, that need love, and bring it. Because once you give up on a people, once you start looking at people as us and them, once you start dividing people based on whatever the issues are, large groups of people will receive injustice that impacts them for years and years to come. We are a redemptive community that is looking to turn that around. And just because we're small doesn't mean that we can't do something really, really big. We learn that from history. It doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot to do something significant in our world. And so I hope that we will. So in the days and weeks to come, we're going to be examining the 8th century prophets. I'm going to be introducing them to you. We're going to be listening to their messages, hopefully learning some things, and at the end of the day, hopefully having a greater appreciation for what it is that they have to teach us. All that being said, if you can, does anybody have a bulletin that's close by? Yeah, thank you. So if you don't have one, on the way out, I'd like you to pick one up, because at the very top, on the back side of the bulletin, the elders have, over the course of last year, as we were moving through the process of becoming a welcoming and affirming church, we made a few amendments to our vision statement. And the reason I'm saying something about it today is because I think it speaks very much to the series that we find ourselves in, and that I want you to just be aware of. So if you don't have one, on the way out, I hope you'll pick one up. But here's what our vision statement says. It says, we are a Christian community where transformation is continual, differences are celebrated, and love is central. In response to God's unconditional love for all people made known to us in Jesus Christ, we are called to be a welcoming and affirming community. As such, we are committed to a humble way of life and faith that models acceptance and that seeks justice, equality, and wholeness of life for all people. Therefore, we embrace and include people of every race, culture, age, gender, sexual orientation, family configuration, physical or mental ability, and socioeconomic status into the full life and ministry of our church. We celebrate diversity and believe that authentic faith can transform differences into an inclusive community of growth. I think getting real clear about who we are helps us to engage the world in a different way. So I want us to be very clear as we journey together about who we are and what we're about and what possibilities there could be as we move into a new future together. So, all that having been said, if you would stand. To do justice, there are people who are needing us to do justice. To love mercy, there are people who are needing us to love mercy. And to walk humbly with our God, there are people who are needing us to do those things. As you think about that, about who you are and about who you want to be, and maybe the gap that exists between the two, I hope you'll consider coming back each week and listening to the messages of the prophets, because I think they have something to teach us. Until then, be people of grace and peace. God bless you guys.
Amen.